Welcome to Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A. I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI. I'm thrilled to welcome you to this week's live Q&A show, where each week I tackle a handful of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about from all over the data center ecosystem globally, including from data center operators like colocation, hyperscale, edge, modular, and wholesale data center providers, as well as the dozens of different kinds of data center technology-related companies and facilities-related companies, data center general contractors, construction companies, real estate firms, investment firms, as well as the vibrant outsourced sales and marketing ecosystem dedicated to data centers, critical facilities, and digital infrastructure. And we're thrilled to have you with us, regardless of what your role is on your go-to-market team. Perhaps you work in some facet of marketing or sales, account management, product management, channel partnerships, or perhaps you are the executive sponsor, the leader who goes out into the marketplace, recruits the best and brightest to become part of your team and help it achieve its potential in this spectacular period of growth at the individual level, at the team level, and at the company level. If you want to make sure that you get notified about upcoming educational events and resources just like this, be sure to subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter that comes to your email inbox on Sundays. You can sign up for free on our website at www.dcsmi.com. If this is the first time you're joining us, welcome. We're thrilled to have you with us. Let us know in the comments what you do in the data center industry. We're super curious. And if you've been with us before, welcome back. We're thrilled to have you joining us as well. So what is on the agenda for today? First, we're going to start out by looking at how a data center cloud and managed services company markets and sells next generation networks. After that, we'll shift into virtualization, cloud, and IT infrastructure, and in particular, how a virtualization, cloud, and IT infrastructure management firm acquires new business. Then we'll look at how a data center real estate and investment management firm can qualify its clients. Then we'll take a real quick break for a message from our sponsor. And in the second half of this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A, we'll talk about how to optimize modular data center lead generation for modular data centers, how a data center engineering firm can attract great sales engineers. And as we head down the home stretch on this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, we'll jump back into the technology part of the ecosystem and look at how a data recovery and disaster recovery provider can improve its data center business development, how a data recovery and disaster recovery provider can improve its data center business development. If you have an idea for a topic or a question or a challenge that you think we should address in an upcoming show, be sure to leave that in the comments on whatever platform you're watching on, and we'll add that to the consideration queue for an upcoming episode. So without any further delay, let's jump right into this week's first question, which takes us into the data center operator segment within the data center ecosystem. So first up is, how does a data center cloud and managed services company market and sell next generation networks, NGN? That is a terrific question. It's a really interesting use case, as we often talk about how data center operators, especially colocation providers, often are joined at the hip with cloud, either because they have direct connects out to the big hyperscalers, or they offer private cloud or hybrid cloud or multi-cloud. And many, if not all, offer some kind of managed services, as long as they're not purely in the real estate business. And the data center operators, like colocation providers, will typically provide a baseline level of managed services with their offering, but many times there's add-ons to get access to more managed services. And if you don't have the willingness or the ability among your team to provide those managed services, a lot of times you're partnering with your channel partners who bring you clients to serve in a different role for other clients in your facility, where those MSPs as outside companies fill that particular void for your particular clients, taking care of managed IT services within your facility. But the most common use case, especially for actually at most sizes, is to look at the ability to upsell, cross-sell managed IT services as like luxury amenities, like more hand-holding, more premium service to your existing clients that normally are just leasing space and power. So with that in mind, how does a company that's principally in data center, cloud, and managed services market and sell next generation networks? So the first thing is, are all three of these lines of business sold to the exact same kinds of client? I always bring this up when we talk about this kind of question, because a lot of times colocation companies, data center operators exist as a result of over time merging with or acquiring other data center operators. And what this means is, given the timing of addressing this kind of question, and given how well you've done that integration work, you may have one very cohesive line of services that's marketed to largely the same kind of clients, the same ideal client profile, the same set of prioritized buyer personas, or you may be essentially running 2 or 3 different kinds of businesses. For the sake of simplicity and our Disney-like euphoria of thinking that everyone has the integration following mergers and acquisitions perfectly nailed down, I'm going to keep it super simple, and it's one set of ideal clients, one set of prioritized buyer personas selling from one kind of sales team that's offering the same kind of clients, data center services, cloud services, and managed services. So you want to know how you can market and sell, how you can create awareness, how you can generate leads, how you can accelerate those leads into sales opportunities, specifically for next generation networks. Now, next generation networks, NGNs, have been around a long time, and it's a specialty within telecommunications. And it typically is consolidating voice, data, and video into a single unified broadband technology and quality of service kind of feature. So what this means almost certainly is you have a minimum, hopefully more than a minimum, of one subject matter expert, perhaps at least a team of subject matter experts on this particular topic, on this particular area within digital infrastructure, within IT infrastructure, next generation networks. And that could have come about, again, because of an acquisition. It could come about because you decide that someone on your leadership team years ago decided to invest resources in becoming highly competent and being able to deliver next generation networks. But chances are there's one or more subject matter experts in a product leadership role, in a technology leadership role, in an engineering leadership role, in a telecommunications leadership role, or at the minimum, and more of like a mid-level individual contributor role, like as a sales engineer or solutions engineer with that deep expertise. Usually they'll have some kind of vendor certifications that complement that. But either way, the most important place that I want you to start is to figure out the talent inventory of who's the expert or experts within your company on next generation networks, because we really can't do this whole marketing and sales plan playbook around this kind of digital infrastructure technology without their help. So once we've identified that, essentially what we want to do is go back and make sure that we're super clear on that ideal client profile. We know geographically where our best clients tend to be located. And a lot of times you can start by reverse engineering that from looking at the logos and the case studies and the testimonials on your website. At the absolute minimum, you have your CRM, your customer relationship management system, you have your sales leadership, you have your finance leadership, you have your company leadership, and you go ask them who are our 10 most profitable clients, who are the 10 perfect clients that we'd like more of. And from there, that typically defines your ideal client profile geographically, where they tend to be located. The good part for data center services, cloud services, and managed services, you typically can sell to clients globally. Although especially on the data center operator, especially on the co-location side, you tend to bias a little more towards clients that can come into your facility and hug their servers, like that are located 10, 20, 30 minutes away, maybe 60 minutes away at the absolute most of one of your facilities. But yeah, for sure, even if the hyper local marketing and sales playbook were 80% of what you were doing, there's still a good solid 20% that identify your company through other means, usually through great digital presence, great digital marketing, great digital sales, as being able to check off a box they're looking for data center cloud services and managed services, specifically in a geographic region where they currently don't have coverage. And in the case of a company like yours, a lot of the reason why they would pick a company like yours is they can get a lot more control and a lot more precision than they can get by just putting some resources in public cloud. So that's the geographic part of it. Needless to say, if you're going to depend on marketing and selling in a region where English isn't the first language yet, for sure, you want to do some localization with your website and your content. And even more importantly, you need to make sure that you have sales team members and support team members and engineers who are bilingual or trilingual or whatever you need to sell in that particular region. There is a certain kind of truth and a certain kind of swagger to people that say, well, English is the language of IT globally. No, it's not. A significant percentage of people from countries that have bigger budgets may be English speaking, but if you truly want to build significant market share, for example, in Latin America, you need team members who speak Spanish and ideally also Portuguese. If you're going to build significant market share throughout Europe, you more than likely need multilingual talent in those regions, and the same thing in Asia Pacific. Asia Pacific may be a little less sensitive to it than other regions, but yeah, for sure, there's localization that comes up when you're selling globally. So that's the geographic part of your ideal client profile. What about size? I think the size part of ICP is something that people don't talk about enough. And what that usually means is your company has products and services that you offer at certain price points. More than likely, if you're doing business like most data center cloud and managed services companies, you have productized services that have some degree of flexibility and customization available, but you have a rough idea of what those bands are, of what the small package looks like, the mid package looks like, what the high-end program looks like. And with that in mind, knowing what your entry-level program looks like, you'll want to back into how big a company needs to be able to afford your minimum program. So let's say, for example, your minimum program is $800 a month, or your local currency equivalent on a 3-year contract. So your 3-year contract has, for argument's sake, like a $30,000 value. You might come to the conclusion that in order for a company to be able to comfortably afford that in the US, in the UK, in parts of Asia Pacific, wherever you're doing business, you may come to the conclusion that, okay, a company typically needs to have at least 10 employees or at least 50 employees or something like that to realistically be able to afford your entry-level program. Now, what about the upper end of the range? How big? What's the top size client that you can realistically service? And that's an interesting one as well. Enterprise clients, really large enterprise clients like Fortune 500 client companies that have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of employees, typically prefer the perceived safety of buying from big data center operators. That's not to say that your 3-location co-location company couldn't try to have a couple of Fortune 500 accounts, but just recognize that in nearly all cases, they're going to let you know every single day that they're in the driver's seat with all kinds of demands that they're going to make of you on financial requirements, integration requirements, legal requirements, presence requirements, compliance requirements, a host of issues that may make it prohibitive for a really small data center operator to have huge Fortune 100, Fortune 500 kinds of clients. So being self-aware about your company size, and again, this certainly doesn't apply if you work for a very large data center operator. If you work for like Digital Realty or Equinix or NTT Global Data Centers or something like that, yeah, there realistically is no ceiling on that. But for most small to mid-sized data center operators, just be self-aware of where you can win and where you can retain and where you're going to struggle to retain, even if you do win. So with that in mind, for a small co-location operator with like 3 locations, or even like a mid-sized co-location operator with 5 to 15 locations or something like that, maybe your upper limit is 5,000 employees. So there you have a range of potential employee sizes within your ICP. And then there's certain verticals, certain industries, certain niches that come up that are very relevant to a company that's primarily providing data center services, cloud services, managed services. Why is industry so important? Because especially when you consider that you are located, your facilities are located in certain geographic areas, your clients are located in certain geographic areas, those typically trigger certain kinds of compliance requirements, especially within certain kinds of regulated industries. So, for example, if you want to have a specialized marketing and sales playbook for healthcare, for selling data center services to healthcare, health tech kind of clients, and cloud services and managed IT services, they're going to for sure require, at least in the US, that you know your stuff when it comes to HIPAA. There'll be other requirements as well, but regardless of whether you're talking about selling into healthcare or selling into financial services or government or education or manufacturing, just know in your particular geographic region and in your addressable market and your ideal client profile's geographic region, where there are green lights and where there are red lights that are going to come up at the intersection of specific industries. Because the green lights are things that you include to specifically go after in your ideal client profile. And the red lights, where you're going to get blocked because you don't have that compliance, that certification, that accreditation that they want, those are red lights, and those are things that you should specifically exclude. Where do these inclusions and exclusions come up? They for sure come up when you're doing cold prospecting, like outbound. They for sure come up when you're running ads in something like LinkedIn Campaign Manager. They definitely come up when you're setting up your drop-down lists on your lead generation form so you can better segment between qualified and unqualified. The inclusions, the big green lights where you want to attract the ideal clients, that almost certainly justifies giving them some real estate on your homepage. That almost certainly justifies giving them real estate on your top and bottom website navigation, and almost certainly justifies that each of those segments, each of their verticals, gets a unique website page that's optimized specifically for that kind of ideal client profile and set of buyer personas. And if you're really doing this right, each one of those industries will likely justify having its own set of lead generation offers, lead generation premium content like interactive tools, downloadable ebooks, reports, templates, its own webinar series, its own bottom of the funnel hand-raising kind of offer, like for a tour, free consultation, free assessment, something like that. But across the board, in this particular business model, what's working really, really well right now are events. And when I say events, I want to be really careful to clarify that and make sure to add that this is owned events. What are owned events and how do they differ from paid events? Well, most people in the data center industry by default are very heavily invested in paid events. What that means is you're buying booths, you're buying physical presence, you're buying sponsorship or something similar to that at someone else's event. In most cases, it's conference organizer companies that put together these massive national and global conferences with thousands of people. And it's very common in that kind of scenario to find companies that are in the data center, cloud, and managed services space spending tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, sponsoring, exhibiting at a single event. It's super, super expensive for that 2 or 3 day event where the expo floor might be open to combined 15 hours the entire time. And you're looking to find that needle in a haystack. And why is the needle in a haystack idea very, very relevant? Well, the diligence that I would encourage you to go through whenever you're thinking about making a major investment in exhibiting or sending multiple team members from your company to a particular conference is how good does that, how tight is the match of their demographics against your ideal client profile? Nearly all events companies that have sales teams and a considered sales process will publish a media kit, will publish some kind of prospectus that lists who their demographics were last year and what they intend their demographics to be this year. So go and get that, download their PDF or however you're going to get that information, and put that on the left-hand side of your screen. Then on the right-hand side of your screen, I want you to bring up your ideal client profile. So you're super crisp about your geographic area, your ideal client size in terms of number of employees, and your industries that are a particularly good match and your industries that are a terrible match. Take that information that's in your ideal client profile and objectively, very carefully, compare it to a particular conference. What I see happening in many, many, many cases is there's a lot of inertia of, we were there last year, we need to be there next year because it will look bad, or we have to go because our competitor X is there. And if they're there and we're not there, it's not going to look good. The reality, though, is these are huge financial investments. These investments are actually so large that by saying yes to one or more of these conferences, you are basically saying no to having one or more team members that you could add to your company on a full-time permanent basis, who care about your company at least 2,000 hours a year, if not 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. Hopefully they have some unplugging time and some work-life balance so that you're not burning them out at 7/24, 365. But for sure, full-time employees of your company are way more likely to have that aha moment of, oh, I finally understand the missing bullet point that we're missing on slide 3 that's causing us to not close these. Or, I've heard 3 or 4 product managers, I've heard 3 or 4 CIOs, I've heard 3 or 4 compliance officers, I've heard 3 or 4 VPs of development say the exact same thing. When you take $100,000, $250,000, $1 million, your local currency equivalent, and you send that over the fence to an outsourced events company, no one there is out for a jog on Tuesday morning at 6 o'clock before they come into the office, having that aha moment and slacking you with the insight that could be worth tens of millions of dollars to your company. Your employees, a lot will. So I want to be super careful to make sure that you're aware that paid events are very different than owned events. Paid events, you're renting attention for a tiny sliver of time. It might be a few days, but more than likely by the time you figure out what percentage of time attendees are spending on that exhibit floor and what percentage of time they're spending in your booth, it could be that you're renting minutes, not hours and not days. That's paid events. Owned events are completely different. Owned events are events that you plan. You control the invite list. You don't have to worry about an ICP mismatch because you're controlling the invitation list. Should hopefully line up perfectly or nearly perfectly with your target account list, with your ideal client profile. You control the topic. You decide how much time you're going to have, and you set the parameters for how this event. And most of all, you don't have to settle for 80% of the attendees at your event being the wrong fit. Should be actually the other way around. At least you should have at least 80 or 90% of the attendees at your events being the perfect fit. You don't have to settle for like, oh, well, I only got 90 seconds with them. And wow, it was really loud at the time they came by the booth. I hope they actually heard what I was saying when I was yelling in their ear. No, you don't have to settle for that, because when you do your own events, you take the time to carefully go through their buyer persona research. So you understand their top 5 or 10 goals and challenges, and you use those 5 or 10 goals and challenges to create your events calendar for the next 10 or 12 months. One event per month on each of those 10 or 12 topics that have come up in your research as being top of mind of big goals that they need to achieve individually as a team or as a company, or 5 or 6 big challenges that are driving completely nuts. And we want those topics in their own words. And each one of those topics becomes an event that you host once a month for the next 10 or 12 months. And in the case of a data center services, cloud services, and managed services company that's marketing and selling locally, these events should ideally be in your facility. And you don't really need much space to be able to do this well. If you have a conference room or a classroom that comfortably seats 15 or 20 people, or you have a foyer that can be repurposed for that purpose for an hour or two, a couple times a month, you have exactly the space that you need. And guess what? Compared to the cost of renting a booth and doing all the booth design and spending tens of thousands of dollars of swag and spending tens of thousands of dollars to ship your equipment back and forth and tens and thousands of dollars for travel and expense. You know what it costs to hold a breakfast seminar or lunch and learn in your classroom or your conference room? Well, you're already on payroll. You already own the facility. No one's charging you for internet or electric. You already have a CRM and an email marketing database to send out these invitations to the right people. So your cost, aside from a little bit of time and logistics to plan this, and it does take longer the first couple that you do, and you'll get faster at it over time. The only real cost, a little bit of catering. And we're not talking about hotel catering with $8 cups of coffee or convention center catering that makes hotel catering look like a bargain. No, we're talking about literally, if you have a tight budget and your manager is making this come out of your discretionary funds or your petty cash, like 10 or 20 people bringing in bagels and pastries and coffee for a breakfast event or for a lunch event, bringing in some deli or pizza or something like that. These are events that you can literally run for a few $100s. I don't know what your unit economics are when it comes to selling a data center, cloud services, or managed services deal, but I sure as heck hope that your sales comp is an order of magnitude with a couple of zeros after the cost of that. So in other words, like if you run 10 or 12 of these a year, it will cost less than you likely attending, not even exhibiting, but like one person from your company attending one national or global conference. Like the difference between the cost and the precision and being able to have their undivided attention for 45 minutes is like night and day. So for the local event, the local marketing and sales engine on this, let's say the event starts at 9. So you have breakfast and check-in and a little bit of networking from 8:30 to 9. You have your educational content, your program where your subject matter expert on next generation networks comes in and does a fantastic next generation networks 101, or more importantly, what shows up on the top 10 or 12 topics that particular buyer persona cares about in their own words. Because the punchline, the segue is that you want most people towards the end of that talk, each one of those talks, to come to a natural call to action conclusion of how that ties into next generation networks and how your company can help their company with next generation networks. But the goal with your educational content, this is not infomercial time. This is educational content that's so good that if your subject matter expert, if you and your subject matter expert had to jump through all the normal hoops in the conference ecosystem where 6 or 8 months out, you apply to speak with a proposed topic and a summary abstract and your bio, and say, cool, that sounds like a great topic. We're going to put you on the website. 8 weeks before they reach out and say, you've been on the website a while. We're really excited about your talk. But we've had some bad actors in the past. We've had some people that have misbehaved on the stage. They've turned it into a nonstop infomercial, way too pitchy, grossly inappropriate. We want to make sure that our attendees get good value from your talk. So here's our template. Send us the first draft of your slides. So you send them the slides. You're like, this advisory committee for that conference looks at your slides and says, wow, this is amazing. Our only concern is, can you really cover this all in 40 minutes? But yeah, the audience is going to be blown away by what you're going to talk about in the session. So that's check and balance number 2. Check and balance number 3 is the conference organizers, again, warning the speakers and warning the attendees that that self-promotion is forbidden and that they'll be given surveys at the end of each talk. And they can raise their hand and they can stop and go get someone if it gets completely out of control. For the most part, the advisory committee members are dropping in and out, and staff from the conference are dropping in and out of the sessions if the self-promotion does get out of control. And because of all those warnings, it rarely does. But your goal at the end of the day, when you're when you're just running a breakout session like that, is that if the room is set for 100 chairs and there's 80 or 90 people in those chairs at the beginning of that session, or ideally 100 people in those chairs and 20 people in the back, you're standing room only, that nearly all that were there at the beginning of the session are still there at the end of the session. And they're nodding their heads and they're taking notes intently. And whenever you're asking for a show of hands or participation, they are participating. They're loving what you're sharing. And then your report card, your evaluations reveal that they loved it. You killed it. They got so much value. And then you have a long line of people after your session coming up to meet you and ask for your card for how they can work with your company going forward. So that's the vibe you're looking for when you're hosting your small breakfast seminars or your small lunch and learns in your own facility, except you're doing it on a smaller scale. Don't get fooled by the huge events promising these big ass vanity metrics. You don't need 3,000 people in the room when, for starters, of those 3,000 people, there's 6 concurrent sessions. So the most you would ever have is 500. The reality is 250 people have their shoes crazy glued to the floor of the hallways and will never leave the hallways. So you're already down to 250. So there's a hypothetical 250 people maximum at that conference. It's never evenly distributed. But if it was, part of the problem is you didn't do your diligence, and 80% of the people at the conference are the wrong people. So you're hoping that you got the right 30, 40, 50 people in the room that actually match up reasonably well with your ICP. But you may not have, because a lot of times people are pressured to attend sessions based on where their boss tells them to go, where their agency tells them to go, where channel partners tell them to go, where clients tend to go. So it's a crapshoot whether you even get the right people when you're speaking organically at a paid event as either a pay-to-play speaker or a speaker that actually earned your way in. But your own events are completely different. You're focused on adding a ton of value to that person, teaching them how others in similar companies in that geographic region, similar company size, similar job roles, similar industries, have tackled this very challenge of figuring out what they're going to do for the next generation network project. And so you give your talk for 30 or 40 minutes, make it super interactive. It's only 15 or 20 people in the room. Give them plenty of time to ask questions at the end. And after that, for anyone that wants to take the tour of your facility, take them around the facility. You'll be amazed how much know, like, and trust happens with just repeating that playbook once a month for the next 10 or 12 months. But wait, there's even more. When they register, you're going to send them back an email that says, when it comes to next generation networks, these are typically team initiatives. It takes a village. People involved from infrastructure, support, cybersecurity, compliance, finance. So with that, operations. So with that in mind, who else from your team, from other teams within your companies would benefit from attending? Simply hit the forward button on your email and add a thought or two on why this matters. That simple email marketing automation is often the key to getting multiple people from the same company registering. And when multiple people from the same company register and attend together, you start to slowly but surely not just meet that person. You start to meet multiple members of the decision committee, and you're proactively driving alignment in the formative stages of their buyer's journey. This not only helps you define the criteria when they come back over and over again for part 2, part 3, part 4 every month, but the know, like, and trust becomes off the charts because multiple people from that team are spending their learning and development, spending their professional development with you. You're out of the vendor box. You're out of the vendor box. You're staying out of the vendor box. They see you in a completely different way because you're covering significant surface area on the 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision. This not only keeps you on the short list, it starts to knock competitors off the short list because they're learning so much from your subject matter experts. They're getting so much value that they're really, it's redefined this whole initiative. They're quoting your best practices. They're quoting your methodology in their own internal meetings. And slowly but surely, when you keep repeating that, you're going to end up meeting the entire decision committee. It's very likely that one of those people says, there's 4 of us here from our team. There's 20 people in our organization overall, but we're having an all hands next Friday. Why don't you just come in and present to the whole team? Like, whoa, that's awesome. And again, this is where you've turned the corner from solutions engineer, sales engineer, account executive to being seen more as a teacher, a consultant, subject matter expert, trusted advisor, maybe even a thought leader. This has a game-changing impact on marketing and selling next generation networks. So do this for your local clients, and also be prepared that there's a significant amount of prospects and clients that you want to market and sell to that can't easily drive to your facility. For those folks, you take the exact same slides, the exact same topics, the exact same curriculums, as long as it's the same ideal clients and the same prioritized buyer personas, and you run those events as webinars. Yeah, you won't be able to have the food, but you can still do the educational content. You can still have it very interactive with polling questions. You can still have plenty of time for Q&A. And frankly, if you're a little creative with a GoPro camera, you can probably still do the tour of your facility for anyone that wants to stick around and see your facility in a live virtual format. For many people at this stage of the game, they probably already recorded some of those things on demand and had more immersive 3D kinds of experiences. But again, it's the same basic idea. We want to insert ourselves into their professional development and learning and development process. So we get out of the vendor box, we stay out of the vendor box, and they see your team members, your internal subject matter experts, as being some of the smartest people on the planet when it comes to anything and everything having to do with data center, cloud services, managed services, and next generation networks. So focus on educating and building trust as the key to marketing and selling next generation networks. So that's how I would approach how a data center, cloud, and managed services company can market and sell next generation networks, NGN. If you're getting good value from this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, make sure to help spread the word by hitting the like button on whatever platform that you're watching on. And if you have an idea for a topic or a question or a challenge that you'd like to see us address in an upcoming show, be sure to leave that in the comments on whatever platform you're watching on. So what do we have up next? It's our next question. So before we were talking about data center operators, now we're going to move into data center technology, and we're going to talk about how a virtualization, cloud, and IT infrastructure management firm acquires new business. So a professional services firm that specializes in virtualization, cloud, and IT infrastructure is trying to acquire new business. Now, when they say acquiring new business, I don't think they're talking about acquiring the entire business like a merger and acquisition standpoint, where they're buying 100% of the equity in a particular business. I think they're talking about new business generation, creating awareness, educating, building trust, generating leads, accelerating some of those leads into sales opportunities, and closing some of those sales opportunities into new clients and new sources of revenue. So with that in mind, for a virtualization, cloud, and IT infrastructure management firm, and for the most part, by the nature of you providing virtualization and cloud, this gives you the ability to have a really big addressable market. You may be even able to sell globally with a few exceptions. So what this means is your playbook for new business generation, for sales and marketing, for go-to-market can take that reality into account, which means it's ideally suited for digital. It's ideally suited for content. It's ideally suited for thought leadership that can be delivered 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, regardless of where someone is located on the planet. With the guardrail that what I would encourage you to start with is to look at where your company has been most successful in the past and figure out with your current capabilities and roadmap of where you're headed in the coming months, where you want to strategically concentrate on growing new sources of business. So if you don't already have a ideal client profile, of course, you can look at the logos on your website and the testimonials and case studies and reviews, and you can look at your 10 biggest sources of revenue, your 10 most profitable clients, and review this information with your leadership team. And from there back into your ideal client profile, where they're located, how big or small they are, and certain industries that are better fits than others. From there, you should be able to generate a target account list. If we're talking about a global target account list, it could be quite large. It could be hundreds of thousands of companies. It could be tens of thousands of companies globally that fit that ideal client profile. If we're talking about hiring sales development reps and account executives that are focusing on specific geographic regions, their target account list may be considerably smaller. It may be anywhere from a few dozen to a few hundred potential target companies. So that's at the company level. Then we want to drill down within the company and think about the individuals within the company that we need to build relationships with, that we need to create awareness with, that we need to educate and build trust with. Those are your buyer personas. And what we want to do is, once we understand who these buyer personas are, we need to prioritize them, because with limited resources, we need to know who's the most important, who's the second most important, who's the third most important. No one ever wants to pick their favorite child, but the reality is you actually do need to pick your prioritized buyer persona. And what that usually comes down to is looking at your 10, 20, or 50 most recent deals and looking at your CRM and looking at the job functions, the job titles, the job roles, the seniority levels of different people that participate in those deals, and figure out who had the biggest influence. The stakeholders, the types of people in these accounts who have the biggest financial impact, the biggest economic impact on a deal advancing and retaining that client, that's going to be your primary buyer persona. The second most important kind of person will be your secondary buyer persona. On enterprise deals, there's almost always at least three. So your tertiary buyer persona. You may over time too discover negative buyer personas. That's a certain kind of villain. That's a person that when they show up, they're going to try to kill your deal. And the reason they're going to try to kill your deal is because they're financially incentivized to do something else, either because you're threatening to potentially replace them, or they have a friend that owns a competing firm to yours, or they're just a miserable SO, you know what, and they're a detractor. So we need to figure out if there's a common thread among a certain kind of archetype, a certain kind of person in these companies who's negative for us. We need to know about that person as well, so we don't waste outbound resources or add resources pursuing them. So we have drop-down lists on our lead generation forms that filter them out. So we have filters and views in our CRM system, so we don't waste time putting those folks into a sales process. So yeah, understanding within those accounts who the prioritized buyer personas makes an enormous difference in being able to more efficiently acquire new business, to generate better leads, generate more sales opportunities, generate new clients for a virtualization, cloud and IT infrastructure management, professional services firm. And once we know those top 2 or 3 buyer personas, we need to understand what's going on in their worlds individually through each of those segments. So let's say, for example, our primary buyer persona is a vice president of IT for a mid-market firm in a particular geographic region that has anywhere from 500 to 5,000 employees or something like that, or 200 to 1,000 employees or something like that. Obviously your mileage will vary depending on where you've had success. Then what you're looking to do within that particular segment is take a representative group of at least 5, ideally 10 or 20 people in that segment, and study the heck out of them. What's going on in their world? What are their biggest goals individually, as a team, as a company, that directly or indirectly relate to virtualization, cloud and IT infrastructure? And we need those goals in their own words. Ideally, these are face-to-face conversations or Zoom or virtual conversations. It could be surveys. It could be studying their CRM records. At the absolute minimum, get their LinkedIn profiles and do some searches on that particular person at that particular company, and get the consensus for how they describe what they do and the kind of content that they share and the kind of groups that they belong to, so we can get consensus on their own words, what their handful of biggest goals are, ideally ranked in order of which comes up most frequently. Then once we know their professional goals that they're working on right now, we need to know where they're struggling the most. What are their biggest challenges? What are their biggest source of stress? What are their biggest problems? Again, in their own words. And we want to get a top 5 or 6 list there. So we end up, for the prioritized buyer persona, that VP of IT, we end up with 10 or 12 topics. And those 10 or 12 topics are perfect for your events calendar for the next 10 or 12 months. In the case of a company and of a data center technology related company that's providing professional services for virtualization, cloud, and IT infrastructure, I'm especially partial to running this education program virtually as webinars or something similar, that are online summits or live streams, because your geographic region is so expansive. If you tell me, however, that you are very focused on a local geographic region, and you have a facility in that region that has a fantastic classroom or conference room where you could host offline webinars. What's an offline webinar? Well, you're in a classroom or conference room with 10, 20, 30 people or whatever the room can hold. And instead of the slides being streamed onto their device, slides are on the TV in the room. And instead of you only getting a pulse for the audience by asking for participation in the chat and in the surveys, you get a pulse of the room by asking questions and reading body language. And when you say breakfast seminar or lunch and learn, you can actually deliver having breakfast and some nice hospitality, some nice food and beverages in there for the audience to enjoy. So again, for a virtualization-centric, a cloud-centric, an IT infrastructure-centric pro services firm, it's far more likely that you're running these as webinars, but you could easily do the exact same thing in person. So you have your 10 or 12 topics once a month for the next 10 or 12 months. For each of your buyer personas, I want you to run a separate event series. So for your primary buyer persona, maybe every Wednesday at noon. And for your secondary buyer persona, we didn't even get to your secondary buyer persona, but that has another time slot that comes up once a month. And for your tertiary buyer persona, if your bandwidth allows, that gets its own event or webinar series. Because when you get to understanding their goals in their own words and their challenges in their own words, they should look quite different. If they don't, then you may actually have a case for consolidating some of those buyer personas into one segment, because you may be slicing and dicing more granular than you need to. But usually what I tend to see is when people are relatively new to being in the thought leadership business of educating and building trust, usually there's not enough segmentation going on, as opposed to there being too much segmentation going on. But the goal with these events is to educate and build trust at scale, to take the smartest subject matter expert that's within your company and bring them in as a guest speaker for that particular webinar, and take the topic and the customer insight research that you did and build an amazingly impactful educational content session that teaches them everything that that particular person needs to know for that particular topic, that shares insight about how other people in that job role in similar companies, a similar geographic area, have tackled those very challenges. And some of this can be done with your internal, a lot of it can be done with your internal subject matter experts as the guest speakers. If you truly don't have anyone internally who is able to speak on that topic, then you can go to some of your consultants, you can go to some of your channel partners and bring them in as guest speakers. Oftentimes having clients on panels that you moderate can also be fantastic, kind of like a live case study type thing. If you've gone to your fair share of conferences, I'm sure you've been to many panels with multiple speakers and moderators, and that for sure can be done both in person and virtually. And as with all of these educational events, always record. There's always going to be, on free events, you'll never get 100% attendance rate. And if you do, it's very, very hard to repeat that success. There's always going to be someone that's like, oh, you know what? Bob and Sue, they really needed to be here, but Bob's had a family issue and Sue was on deadline. So is there any way we can get a copy of the slides or recording from today? Oh yeah, for sure. We'll provide that to everyone attended. So you can share this with other stakeholders from your company. And the same thing with in person. There's always more people that should have attended, hundreds or thousands of people that should have been in the room that just weren't there for practical logistical reasons, or they didn't even know you existed at that particular time. So record it, repurpose it. Some of the people will watch a 7-minute segment or a 37-second segment from that, and that will be the hook that gets them to be motivated to watch the whole thing. And some of them aren't even video people. Some of them will react more to slides. Some of them will react more to text posts, social media posts, infographics, blog summaries, whatever works best for capturing that attention. But for a company that is principally in virtualization, cloud, and IT infrastructure professional services, the single most important thing that you can do is to get very client-centric about who they are and what they care about, and consistently every single month show up as part of their professional development and their learning and development process. This gets you out of the vendor box. It gets your prospects and clients to start to really, really hold your subject matter experts in high esteem because they're learning so much from you, and helps you really shape the criteria that they use to evaluate all the different options that are in front of them. It gets you on the short list. It keeps you on the short list. You get to meet multiple stakeholders from that same company and proactively drive alignment. And it is by far, in a way, the best playbook that a virtualization, cloud, and IT infrastructure management company can use to acquire new business, is getting into the business of, on a very regular basis, producing small but highly niched, high impact educational events for the perfect people that line up perfectly with your ideal client profile and your target account list and your prioritized buyer personas. Don't get seduced by the vanity metrics of these massive events with hundreds of thousands of people in the room, when you know that if you looked more objectively, you'd discover that only 10 or 20% of the people in the room are a good fit for you. No, we don't want 80 or 90% of the people in the room to completely tune out and ignore us. We want 100% of the people in the room to be paying attention to your great educational content. And that's why it's so much more impactful to get in the business of discovering the topics and creating and hosting your own educational events as a fantastic way for a virtualization, cloud, and IT infrastructure management company to acquire new business. Cool. So what's up next? Next up, we're going to head up into the real estate and management part of the data center ecosystem. So just to review how we organize the data center ecosystem over at DCSMI, you have the data center operators. These are like the co-location, hyperscale, edge, modular, and wholesale data center providers in the data center operator segment. There's 22 different kinds of data center technology companies that we catalog, including like storage, hardware, software, cybersecurity. There's facilities related companies like power, cooling, energy, commissioning, decommissioning, physical security. And then, so that's the third segment. The fourth segment is we place construction, real estate, and investors all in the same segment because they're so closely joined at the hip. And in the fifth segment, we have outsourced sales and marketing. So this particular question is all about that fourth segment, construction, real estate, and investment. So how does a data center real estate and investment management firm qualify its clients? How does a data center real estate and investment management firm qualify its clients? That is a fantastic question. And it really depends on what part of the ecosystem that you're located within. Because for real estate professionals like DCRE professionals, over time, you will develop based on the size of a particular property, of the size of the campus. You'll develop your criteria for like who's worth spending time with and who is a real long shot to this, and anyone that's in any facet of real estate, even like at the most basic level on residential real estate or commercial real estate or industrial real estate, of which really data center real estate is a subset of that, will develop over time. Like what's its criteria? What's your criteria for what's the perfect kind of investor look like? What does the perfect kind of client look like who's buying this particular property? And generally, smaller data center real estate firms and people that are relatively new will tend to lean towards smaller investors that may get turned away by the big guys. And conversely, if you're like Microsoft or Meta or Alphabet or something like that, you probably have been programmed to believe that the safest course for you is to engage with the biggest of the big, which would be like JLL, CBRE, the biggest of the big global players in the space on the real estate side. So a lot of, just like most parts of the data center ecosystem, people from smaller firms tend to work with newer clients, less established clients that appreciate your size as being a positive, and conversely, bigger companies tend to feel safer or tend to gravitate towards other bigger companies. So there's that part of the qualification in terms of like the ability to have financing, the ability to have enough working capital. How about just the ability to be realistic about what it takes to get past the planning stage to the point where a shovel can go in the ground? I've heard like 10 million, 100 million. They're 8-figure, 9-figure numbers at this point to get to the point for a brand new project to go forward, which is such a big difference on the moat that keeps people in or keeps people out of data center development projects compared to like the 2010s when I used to work with small independently owned co-location operators. These were closely held companies where the owner of the company probably had a net worth in the low 7 figures and the company had a valuation in the high 7 figures, low 8 figures. So the reality is it wasn't totally out of reach for individual upper middle class kind of investors to put together groups of in their cap table that could realistically go after this without massive amounts of capital. And I think no big surprise that most of those companies have rolled up into larger companies over time. There's very, very few that were able to, at that scale, survive on their own without getting acquired by others that roll them into larger regional and larger national and larger global footprints using REITs, real estate investment trusts. So there's that part of qualifying, which is really important because there's so much hype going on in this industry. It's really strange. Like in the last year and a half, just about every week, I get someone reach out to me and says, like, I have a property that I think could be a data center. Do you think I should build it there? Like, and I don't think we're in a bubble, but we've reached this point of mania where people that don't know anything about the data center industry want in because they've heard about NVIDIA, they've heard about they're seeing these things constantly on mainstream media. And because of that, they want in on this. And they're so new to this industry. They're calling a go-to-market sales and marketing company for advice on real estate. I'm like, you're talking to the completely wrong part of the ecosystem. And that's where I usually take a couple of minutes and send them the section on our website that says, look, you really need to be talking to someone that specializes in real estate and construction and the investment part of the ecosystem, not people specializing in go-to-market and sales and marketing and new business generation. So yeah, there's that craziness going on with that. There's so much interest in this space that all of a sudden you're getting people that are brand new, that may have previously invested in opening gas stations or ice cream parlors or buying fast food franchises or something like that. And they want in, or timeshares or Airbnbs, and they want in on investing in data centers. So that's on the DCRE, the data center real estate side. I always say, again, I send them to a couple of big firms. I'll send them to a couple of smaller recommendations. I'm especially partial to sending people in the direction of people that have supported what we do at DCSMI, like by being on our podcast, the Data Center Go-to-Market Podcast. Give a shout out to someone that was on an episode a couple of weeks ago, Howie Berry from Avison Young. He's based in Palo Alto, California, in Silicon Valley, but his team, his practice specializes in data center real estate. So if you're looking for someone that can be a first entree into that category, definitely look up Howard Berry from Avison Young. So on the investment side, how do they qualify clients? Well, parts of having an investment firm that specializes in digital infrastructure, there's definitely a lot of parallels with that kind of venture capital firm or that kind of private equity firm, just any like technology focused or real estate focused investment firm. So you're looking for like accredited investors, you're looking for certain minimum levels of capital, working capital requirements. And again, it depends purely on the size of this. Like if you have a small, like 10 or 20 megawatt project, which by today's standards, I guess is relatively on the small side with a single location or two buildings on a campus or something like that. That's a very different kind of investor than someone that's potentially buying into a portfolio of a dozen or a couple dozen hyperscale facilities spread out globally. So again, data center real estate folks have a way of qualifying their clients. Investment firms have a way of qualifying their clients. And I think the single best way that you can do this is to use the same way that all sales professionals in the data center industry operate, is recognize that most of your prospects and clients are doing tons of research on their own before they ever get to you. The self-guided buyer's journey, where people get like 85 or as Gartner says, 83% of the way through their journey, researching, comparing options and evaluating pricing before they're open to a conversation with someone on your sales team. And in that world, the self-guided buyer's journey, it's incredibly important that we provide lots of ways to show up in the early and the middle part of their research and decision-making process. And in this particular case, this is where we want to provide tremendously valuable content and educational resources and educational events about data center real estate and about data center investing. And when we understand who our ideal clients are, this would be institutional clients in the case of B2B, although I certainly imagine there's some B2C interest as well on the individual investor side, but mostly we're talking about B2B. It's the same thing you would use in any other part of the data center ecosystem. You need an ideal investor profile. You need an ideal property owner profile of where you're going to get your listings from, where you're going to get your prospects from, where you're going to get your investors from. And then within those profiles, who are the key people that you want to educate and build trust with? Segment, prioritize, get really client-centric, understand the biggest questions they have, their biggest goals and challenges, and create fantastic educational content that you can deliver in person to local events that are attracting those individual people, that you can deliver through webinars, that you can deliver through your email marketing, that you can deliver through social media posts. You should for sure at this stage of the game have a significant presence where you're educating and building trust on LinkedIn and on YouTube. I'm very partial to running webinars and live streams on a regular basis, very meta for how you're consuming this content, as a way to educate and build trust with people within those segments. And the same way that you qualify any kind of person with your natural call to action as they're registering for an event or they're registering to have a consultation or talk to someone from your team. Yes, the handful of questions that you would ask someone in any kind of context to figure out what their resources are, how big or small of a property they are looking for, where they're located, where they're looking for this property to be, urgency, the same kind of qualifying questions that you would ask in person, digital. So your lead generation forms look like this. And if even better is have something for people that are in the early and the middle stages that provides value to them that doesn't feel like they're being interrogated. So tools that help them to figure out what's the minimum level of capital that they would need for this to be viable in a particular region. Quizzes that help them better understand where their knowledge fits and where some of the gaps are and how they can learn more. At least one of the major DCRE firms that I know of has literally hundreds of hours of internal content that they use to train their internal team that I believe that they're in the process of repurposing for a couple of different audiences. Nearly all of the big data center real estate firms and some of the investment firms put out great thought leadership research. They do original research on a weekly basis, quarterly basis on the state of individual markets that they sell into. So for example, if they're in the US, they're going to have great research on the Chicago data center market and the Dallas data center market and emerging rapidly growing markets like Portland, Oregon, and Atlanta, Georgia, and things like that. That's a great way to build thought leadership. And again, it can be print, downloadable behind a gated lead generation form. It can be infographics. It can be webinars. It can be live streams. It can be all of the above. The idea, again, is to educate and build trust, and then to infuse into that educational content lead generation forms that actually do some of that qualification for you by asking. Again, you don't want them to feel like they're being interrogated, especially in the early and the middle parts of their journey. But typically, as they get further along and you're providing more value, usually you can ask more questions and you can have it look more like an assessment or almost like a application for better qualifying clients. So those are some of the key considerations that I would be thinking of. Is a lot of it depends on the stage of your company, how big or small your company is, with the kinds of investors, the kinds of clients that you potentially attract. Depends on how expansive your geographic market is. But where I think there's a lot of opportunity that's not being nearly fully saturated is repositioning your team to be seen more as teachers and consultants and subject matter experts and trusted advisors, maybe even thought leaders when it comes to anything and everything having to do with the particular part of data center real estate and the particular part of data center investments that your company specializes within. And usually 9 times out of 10, it's location specific, but yeah, there's investors that are really good at edge data centers or just do hyperscale or something like that. So lean into where your biggest strengths are, but at the end of the day, use content, use thought leadership to have a commanding presence in their professional development and learning and development. Because if they see you as the teachers and the consultants and the subject matter experts, then all of that leads to trust. And that's what this is all about. And the better job you can do with proactively using education to build trust, the more likely it is that you're going to get candid answers to the qualification questions, and you're going to have a much more efficient sales process, a much better client relationship. So that is how I would address how a data center real estate and investment management firm can better qualify clients. We're going to take a real quick break for a message from our sponsor. And when we come back in the second half of this week's show, we'll dive into 3 more of the biggest questions in data center go-to-market sales and marketing Q&A.
Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com.
Hey there, Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. We're all about elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market professionals in the growth of the data center industry. And you're watching Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A, our weekly live show where we tackle a handful of the biggest sales and marketing issues that we're hearing about from all over the data center ecosystem, all over the world. If you have an idea for a topic or a question or a challenge that you think we should address an upcoming show, be sure to leave that in the comments on whatever platform that you're watching on, and we'll add that to the consideration queue for upcoming episodes. So next question is about a particular kind of data center operator, particular kind of data center provider, modular data centers. And how do we optimize modular data center lead generation? How do we have better lead generation for a modular data center company? So what's interesting about modular data centers is there's certain characteristics that align pretty well with being a data center operator, and that a lot of times they're providing a significant amount of ongoing support to their clients from an operational perspective, because it's relatively rare that the companies that they're selling to have deep expertise on operating modular data centers. But there's also a lot of parallels to data center construction, and that they actually are building portable data centers, and what's usually the size of like a recreational vehicle or 18-wheeler or a cargo container that can be easily transported by truck, by railroad, by boat to another location. And then there's even certain aspects. So there's aspects of like being a data center provider operator, there's aspects of data center construction, and then there's aspects of manufacturing. Most companies that are marketing and selling modular data centers don't have the scale of what most people would consider as like a factory, but the reality is like they are essentially factories. Their data centers are being built off-site in your location, and then they're being transported to where they're ultimately destined to reside. And the great part with modular data centers is because they can be deployed so quickly to a particular location, they can be used, and they're temporary. They can be temporary. So they can be fantastic for an event that's going to run for 3 to 6 months. They can be fantastic for deploying in a disaster recovery kind of context where you need something in a location fast. And in the world we live in now, where companies are so utility grid power constrained, they can be deployed to places where there actually is utility grid power without taking 2 to 3 years to build a data center facility from scratch. And the lead time for typically building these modular data centers is measured in weeks or months, not years. And in the case of modular data centers that are already built, all you're really talking about is transportation time. So modular data centers are not especially new. I first toured a modular data center, I guess you'd call it a factory, where they're building the modular data centers in Mesa, Arizona, in the Phoenix, Arizona suburbs must have been fall of like 2016. But they were around for easily 3 or 4 years before that, and they still continue to be very popular. And they're not just popular for utility grid reasons, they're great for edge reasons as well. So if you have a very specific location requirement where they don't just want a data center facility that's in Houston, Texas, but it needs to be on a specific street corner at a specific GPS coordinate in Houston, Texas, or the same thing in London or in Singapore or Toronto or wherever, is they don't just want it in that metro area or in that downtown area. They want it at a very specific location in that downtown area. Modular and edge can be fantastic for that. Now, one little sidebar that I'll point out as well is the concept of modular construction has also come up pretty recently in the context of data centers. And that's a little different than modular data centers. Modular data centers, as they've existed for the better part of more than 10 years, look on the outside a lot like a cargo container. They look on the outside almost like a recreational vehicle, and on the inside kind of looks like a prefabricated. If you've ever seen a temporary construction office at a construction site, think about a bigger version of that, really, really upscale with its finishes, because there's millions, if not tens of millions of dollars of IT assets inside. So that's the modular data center. But there's also a lot of companies right now that are using modular data center construction to build data centers in like prefabricated pods to accelerate the deployment of data center construction projects. But they're not traditional modular data centers. They don't look like traditional modular data centers. And this came up with a data center developer that I hosted on the podcast a few months back. Yuval Bachar from ECL in Silicon Valley. He's a veteran of Cisco, Meta, LinkedIn, Microsoft. And the project that he's working on right now is to make hydrogen fuel cell powered data centers a reality. It's great for placing data center facilities in regions where there's no utility power available. It's great for sustainability. And when I spoke to Yuval, he was explaining that they needed really a whole different platform for the energy systems that go into powering these kinds of data centers. So that's part of the reason why it makes it impossible to be able to install his approach to hydrogen fuel cells in conventional data centers. So they actually do all of the construction. They build these in modules. I believe the modules, you can look this up. We'll link to the interview in the resources section for the particular podcast, but you can also just search ECL, it's the name of their company, and Joshua Feinberg podcast, and it'll come right up. I believe they're doing 5 megawatt builds, but again, the idea basically is to build these modules that allow people to build them in certain sizes, and if they need more capacity, they just invest in a second module or a third module or a fourth module that gets placed together on the campus for the particular facility. So it's modular construction, and that modular construction definitely has some parallels to what you may have seen over the years in commercial construction or industrial construction, but is very different than the concept of modular data centers. So if you've ever driven down the highway where you live and you've marveled at the fact that they're able to build a strip mall in a couple of weeks using these giant prefabricated concrete curtains. In other words, they're building a 100,000 square foot strip mall faster than they can build a residential new home with 2,000 square feet. It takes 6 months to build a new home, but they can in 6 weeks build a 200,000 or 100,000 square foot industrial building or strip mall. It's because everything is prefabricated offsite, and they're using these tilt walls to put them in place. I don't think this is particularly unique to the area where I live in South Florida, but obviously living in an area where we've had to have become world-class at weather protection definitely helps to get really, really good at building bunker-style buildings that withstand all kinds of weather elements. And one of the things that is unmistakable is that you see these modular projects, these office buildings, these warehouse complexes, these strip plazas that are built in weeks, huge facilities in weeks, because everything is manufactured off-site, transported to the site, and done final assembly as place. And they're able to do that faster than building a single family 2,000 square foot house. So again, so the advantage when you think about this for modularly constructed data centers is it's taking things that would take years and getting it down to weeks or months. And the only reason it's typically months is that most of these modules and most of these modular data centers are not built on spec. Most of these companies are not carrying inventory. They sell them, they get the permitting process going, and then they're manufacturing and then delivering them. So it's usually months. So for optimizing lead generation for all of this, I think a lot of what it comes down to is understanding where you can logistically manufacture, where you can transport, where you can install, where you can support. And in theory, both modular data centers and modularly constructed data centers can be manufactured anywhere in the world and shipped to anywhere in the world. From a cost-effective and logistics perspective, probably way more likely that you have, if you're, for example, headquartered in the United States, that you're primarily focused on those modular data centers being shipped somewhere in North America. And if you're manufacturing modular data centers somewhere in the European Union, you're primarily focused on shipping those modular data centers within the European Union, either by truck or rail or by barge. But yeah, in theory, they're movable, so they can be shipped anywhere in the world. So first, you need to really get your mind around, like, geographically where you're manufacturing and where you want to be marketing and selling. The second part of what complicates modular data centers is, even though modular data centers have been around for the better part of a decade, there's a lot of people that that are stakeholders in these kinds of initiatives that may have never been in a modular data center, may have never walked through a modular data center. So there's a lot to be said for your particular facility. It's very likely that you give tours and you probably have a classroom and a conference room where you can comfortably hold 10, 20, 30 people. And that's great for folks that are located in your local community. And you can and should be on a regular basis hosting great educational events for people that would be perfectly lined up with your ideal client profile and your prioritized buyer persona. So over the course of a year, hundreds of your ideal prioritized buyer personas are coming to your facility, and they're learning from your subject matter experts about anything and everything that's relevant to making the right decision for investing in modular data centers as part of their digital infrastructure. And if you do this really well, you'll likely segment your buyer personas into 2 or 3 different groups, and 2 or 3 weeks of the month, you're running these 1 or 2 hour fantastic educational events and giving people a tour and attaching some breakfast or lunch and some networking, and maybe even hosting some user groups. And that's, again, it's great for people that are local. But what about people that are long distance? Sure, you can for sure hold webinars, but the reality is modular data centers are something that are still relatively unique, that there's something to be said for getting people to walk through your modular data center. That said, it's pretty expensive to transport modular data centers just for one particular event. Obviously, it's not so expensive because you're doing it as a core part of your business when you're delivering from your facility to where the modular data center is ultimately going to go. But it's definitely not like shipping a couple boxes of a couple servers or something like that to a particular location. But let's say, for example, you're located in Phoenix, and over the course of the next couple of quarters, you want to build significant presence in the San Francisco Bay Area and Seattle, Washington, and Salt Lake City. So in Seattle, Washington, Salt Lake City, and the San Francisco Bay Area, you identify a partner, like a co-location partner, that is going to have 1 or more of your modular data centers as a complement to what they're making available. So whether they decide to have your modular data center sitting in their parking lot permanently or just for a period of a month or 2 at a time, this is a key part to getting people in that region to experience what it's like to walk through and spend time in a modular data center. So in all 3 of those instances, let's say you're, and it doesn't have to be a co-location operator, but I find for a lot of instances that that's the perfect co-marketing partner for this kind of thing, because it's very likely that your co-location co-marketing partners in each of those marketplaces in their facility have a nice classroom or a nice conference room where you can hold breakfast seminars and lunch and learns and invite people in from the local community. And you pretty much do the exact same thing that you do in your own facility. Is that modular data center is sitting there for a couple of weeks at a time or a couple of months at a time, and you have your 2 or 3 prioritized buyer personas, and every time you're running one of these events, you give yourself a minimum of 4 to 6 weeks lead time, and you send out a couple hundred, a couple thousand invites, and you cap it at 20, 30, 40 registrants, whatever your conference room or classroom capacity is. And you provide this great world-class educational, professional development kind of event for people in a particular role. So it could be digital infrastructure executives, it could be other co-location operators, it could be data center development consultants, it could be data center commissioning experts. Again, like who your secondary, who your tertiary segments are is entirely up to you with your go-to-market playbook. But the basic idea is that once you figure out these individual segments, is do your homework, get really client-centric, figure out what's top of mind for them, their 5 or 6 biggest goals they're working on professionally, their 5 or 6 biggest frustrations that they're working on professionally. And those are the 10 or 12 topics that you'd want to cover over the course of a year. Now, If you're leaving that co-location, that modular data center, your modular data center in place permanently for a year, then you can do a once a month event over the next 10 or 12 months. And you keep going back and visiting there either 1 week out of the month or 2 or 3 weeks out of the month, depending on how you're rotating in the different buyer personas. But it's the same basic idea, is you take your smartest subject matter experts and you utilize those folks as teachers and consultants that, for these small audiences, give fantastic value with helping stakeholders understand how other people in similar kinds of companies have tackled some of their biggest digital infrastructure professional goals and challenges. You keep it super interactive because you determine the guest list at your target account list, at your ABM, your account-based marketing. You have the perfect people in the room. Ideally, you have multiple people from the same company attending, because when you suggested that, hey, this is typically a team effort, it takes a village, who else from your team should also attend? They said, oh yeah, that's a great idea. A couple of us from our team are going to attend together. So you're proactively driving alignment. You're meeting multiple members from the decision committee. And when you do this over and over again, and they feel that they're actually learning, that's the key thing with all of this. They can't feel like it's an infomercial, but they feel like they're actually learning from your super smart internal subject matter experts. And you could also be including some of your channel partners as guest speakers. You could be including consultants as speakers. You could be bringing in a couple of different clients of yours and moderating panels, or doing all of the above. But the goal is to educate and build trust, and do this repeatedly. And 30 or 40 minutes is in a classroom setting. Make it super participatory, give them plenty of chance to ask questions. And then for anyone that wants, and probably just about everyone in this context, you take them outside to the back of the facility, and you do the rest of the session with the 15 or 20 people in the modular data center, giving them a tour of how it actually works. So, obviously, you need utility hookups and telecommunications hookups and everything to make this a reality, so you can demo in real time. But that's the playbook that I would use. So in our not so hypothetical, probably reasonably realistic example, you're headquartered in Phoenix. You want to grow footprint in San Francisco Bay Area. You want to grow footprint in Seattle, Washington, and Salt Lake City. So in each of those markets, you go find a co-location operator who's willing to let you, in return for business development partnership, place your modular data center in their parking lot for anywhere from a couple of weeks to several months. And you run these events together with them, and you build pipeline that way. And the more people spend time with your subject matter experts, you're educating and building trust. The know, like, and trust very naturally grows its way into opportunity generation. But most of all, by the time they get to the point that they're ready for a sales conversation, you've totally indoctrinated them. You've taught them all your methodologies, your best practices. They're quoting your best practices in their own internal meetings with how they're navigating this initiative. And at the absolute minimum, you've earned your way onto the short list. When this goes really well, you have pretty much neutralized most competitive, in some cases, all competitive options off of their short list, to the point that when you've become an integral part of their professional development and learning development, really magical things can happen, because you've turned the corner. You've gotten out of the vendor box. You've gotten out of that price sensitivity mode of having to constantly undercut to win deals, because they recognize and they've been educated about the real issues that matter most. And most of all, they've walked away with the impression that, like, wow, you have that was super helpful. I can't believe how much I learned. This was so worth my time. I'm going to bring my boss back next time. I'm going to bring the rest of the team. I'm going to invite them to come in and give a version of this talk to our entire team, so they can meet the entire team. When this works well, know, like, and trust, you've educated and built trust, and they really, really start to see you as a trusted advisor on anything and everything having to do with modular data centers. And that's the end of the day, when it comes to lead generation, opportunity generation, accelerating some of those opportunities into new clients and new sources of revenue. That's what this is all about. And a self-driven buyer's journey, where people are more sales allergic than ever, where they're cutting you out of that first 83% in favor of self-guided resources. The only way to earn your way back in early and often is to be seen more as a teacher, as a consultant, as a subject matter expert, trusted advisor. And some of your most seasoned people on your team will be seen as thought leaders. So that's how I would optimize modular data center lead generation. Of course, you need the standard blocking and tackling and tactics, like having landing pages and email marketing and social media and digital ads and outbound and calls to action. But these are there's nothing especially new there. All of that playbook has been around for 10, 15 years. I think what's more important than ever, or more urgent than ever, is to recognize that you're competing for attention against the self-driven journey and the immediate gratification that your prospects and clients can get from ChatGPT and Copilot and Gemini and Perplexity and YouTube and LinkedIn. And they have to get more value from their relationship with you and your subject matter experts than they can get on a self-guided basis. I think that's the huge thing that everyone is overlooking. And when it comes to events that make this happen, being shoehorned as one of 100 different vendors or one of 3,000 attendees into someone else's event, just for the most part, isn't getting it done anymore. If you have a very precise definition of your ideal client profile, and you have a very defined account-based marketing list and a very defined set of prioritized buyer personas, the name of the game is more watch time, more session time, more minutes, more hours with the right people on these decision committees, where you have an opportunity to really, really educate and build trust. So you're not begging them for a couple minutes of attention. It's actually the other way around, is that they're being attracted to you because they're learning so much from you about anything and everything having to do with modular data centers, that you're now a crucial part of their and their teams and their companies' approach to professional development and keeping up with the skills that are necessary for a company like yours that needs to deploy modular data centers. So that's how I would optimize modular data center lead generation. If you've been getting good value so far from this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, make sure that you help to spread the word and hit the like button on whatever platform that you're watching on. Okay, what is our next question? Boy, what I love about this week's question is we're really, really hitting all different areas of the data center ecosystem: data center operators, technology, facilities, construction, real estate, investment. This next question is about the facilities part of the data center ecosystem. And this is about an engineering firm, a professional services firm that specializes in data center engineering. How does a data center engineering firm attract great sales engineers? How does a data center engineering firm attract great sales engineers? That's a super interesting question, because I've noticed increasingly over the last 6 months to a year, a lot of the interviews that I've hosted with guest subject matter experts on my Data Center Go-to-Market podcast, I've noticed increasingly a lot of people that end up in sales roles, as in business development roles, in account executive roles, are coming from engineering backgrounds. And it's not like they just have a degree in engineering. It's like, no, they have a degree in some facet of engineering. It could be mechanical engineering, it could be electrical engineering, or something different. It could be computer engineering. It's not like they just have that background. No, they actually worked as an individual contributor and in a leadership role in some facet of engineering long before they got into the data center ecosystem. And there's at least a handful of people, there's probably several handfuls of people that have been on the podcast that fit that profile to a T. So increasingly, I think a lot of companies are warming up to the reality that in a world where so many prospects and clients are so ridiculously sales allergic, they don't want to spend time with salespeople anymore. And the self-driven buyer's journey, where 83% of researching, comparing options, and evaluating pricing now happens without you in the room, the best way for someone from your team to get back into the room to influence the early and middle part of the journey is for your prospects and clients to feel like they're spending time with a peer. And the best way for them to feel like they're spending time with the peer is for that person that's selling to engineers to actually be an engineer themselves. And it may be that they haven't been a practicing engineer, that they haven't had a full-time job just doing engineering all day long for 10 or 20 years, but they understand the language, they understand the job roles, they have a lot of empathy for what goes into this. And because of that, they really have an unfair advantage relative to traditional sales development reps and account executives. And I think the future for a huge part of the sales profession in the data center industry is exactly that. I noticed the same thing happening with data center operators a year or two ago, where increasingly the leaders and the account executives that I was speaking to at data center co-location operators and similar kinds of companies, the more seasoned sales professionals were technical enough and had the kind of training and certifications that were technical enough that they had home computer labs, like running little mini data centers in their home office to tinker with and learn on nights and weekends. And their skills were actually strong enough that if they had the time and inclination, they could be a fractional CTO, an outsourced fractional CTO nights and weekends to small, medium-sized businesses in their local area. I don't think they were quite technical enough that they could be an enterprise CTO to a company their size or their client size, because we know it's a very, very different level to be a CTO of a mid-market or enterprise company with thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of employees. But they certainly were technical enough that for a small and medium-sized business in their local area that doesn't have much of an IT department, they could go in and basically be the fractional CTO on a nights and weekends basis. Whether their employer would allow it, whether their personal family situation would allow it, whether their interest and time would allow it is a whole different ballgame. But having had that kind of business myself early on in my career, where I was a fractional CTO for small businesses, taking care of anything and everything having to do with IT needs, I recognize that profile very, very quickly. So that's for sure happening on the operator and on the infrastructure side. But I see it happening on the engineering side as well. And the engineer job role is especially valuable to companies that are specializing and working with facilities executives and engineers. So for that data center engineering firm that wants to attract great sales engineers, I think what it largely comes down to is they're going to be very attracted to employers, professional services firms that have stellar reputations for working on world-class projects. For someone that's looking for that career opportunity, that's looking for that advancement, that's looking for that professional gratification, they're going to be attracted to employers that have the best projects and have great culture. And websites like Glassdoor and Indeed with employer reviews and everything, they've been around for quite some time, and that's certainly part of that. But I see increasingly employer marketing being a big part of this. And despite the fact a lot of candidates are sales allergic and want to do a lot on their own on their journey, there's still a very vibrant, at least for now, data center recruiter profession, data center recruiting ecosystem that works within data centers, critical facilities, and digital infrastructure. And some of the data center recruiters specialize in certain pockets of the data center ecosystem. Like I've had a couple of great guests on the podcast that specialize in data center construction, one that's based in the US in Houston, and the other one based in Houston, Texas, and the other one based in Manchester, United Kingdom, specializing specifically in construction related jobs, where engineering would probably be the first cousin kind of that. And then there's others that specialize a lot more broadly just in all data center roles. And what I've noticed is it's relatively unusual that they're getting sales and marketing requirements, but it's very common that they're getting technologist requirements, that they're getting facilities engineering kind of requirements, construction related requirements. So it's not that easy to fill these jobs. So if you're a small to mid-sized engineering firm and you want to stand out as an employer of choice, I think you need a marketing and sales and go-to-market playbook as an employer looking to win the best talent. So in addition to your VP of business development, your chief revenue, your chief commercial, who's responsible for ideal client profile, addressable market, target account list, territory management, personas, managing the deals pipeline, hiring team members to manage their individual deals pipeline. In addition to that, I think talent acquisition is a huge, huge part of an engineering firm, a professional services firm being competitive. In order for you to truly, truly be competitive, I think a big part is being out there in front and being seen, not only talking about your projects, but talking about what makes you a leader in the space. So sponsoring industry-specific research like the state of data center engineering, hosting educational events, both in person and virtually. And just as important, having your thought leaders, your subject matter experts in your company that come from a data center engineering background. In addition to those folks speaking at webinars and podcasts and events that are targeted towards your core buyer personas, have some of those folks spend some time creating content that is focused on attracting great sales engineers, like attracting the perfect colleagues that they'd want to work with, the perfect team members. And it's just strange how companies completely overlook this enormous potential for this. And I think this is part of the reason, as a lot of it has to do with how talent acquisition and HR is organized within your company. If it's just seen as like an order taker, if it's just seen as a cost center, your company is probably going to go really cheap on this and severely underinvest in this and punt this completely to external recruiters. And that would be a mistake. Here's why. External recruiters also need these materials on your website. There's a podcast that literally just went live today on the same day that this Q&A show is being recorded with Roxanne Zapotnik, who works for a executive search firm in Houston, Texas, JCP, Joseph Crisp Partners. And we very specifically talked about how the employers that are winning the best candidates are recognizing, especially among Gen Z and millennials, that they don't want to have 30-minute conversations anymore to learn about a company's benefit structure or learn about people that have been successful in those job roles. They're consuming a lot of this content on social media, on LinkedIn and YouTube and other related social channels. In other words, the same kind of sales allergy that prevents people from wanting to spend time with your sales team in the context of looking at buying engineering services from your company, that same kind of person, when they're in the job market, doesn't all of a sudden say, gee, I really dislike spending time with salespeople when I'm buying engineering services. But as a job candidate, oh yeah, for sure, I'll put up with whatever nonsense they throw at me. The reality is, no, their preference really is to self-propel themselves through that journey. And one of the best ways to propel themselves through the journey is having great events, in-person events, digital events, recording interviews with people that work for your company and different kinds of job roles and talk about how they've enjoyed working with your company and the career path and trajectory. So the same kind of content marketing, the same kind of educational events, the same kind of thought leadership that you would use for the early and middle parts of your journey for your core buyer personas. Think of the sales engineers as just another kind of buyer persona that deserves its own go-to-market playbook, its own marketing resources, its own sales-related resources. And the sales-related resources are usually a combination of internal talent acquisition, external recruiters, and the hiring managers all working together and partnering to make that a reality. But I think these self-guided resources, if you're really looking to attract great sales engineers, is a very, very underutilized, undervalued way, but tremendously powerful way to win over the best and the brightest. Conversely, at the other extreme, if your company's website hasn't been updated in 10 years, if it looks really, really, really outdated, if it has very little content, if they go to your LinkedIn page and your last post was 6 months ago and doesn't have anything that would really be remotely interesting to them, that's sending a signal as well. All of these are part of your pitch for attracting great sales engineers. So think about what you would want if you were looking for a sales engineering firm to hire to provide professional services to you. And largely those same kind of preferences are the same kind of preferences that someone's going to use in the job market, except instead of making a decision on who to hire, they're making a decision on who to work for. And yes, competitive salaries and competitive benefits definitely matter. But I think when you really dig into this, you're going to discover that the kinds of projects they can work on and the kind of colleagues that they're going to work on are going to factor very, very largely into this. And the better they can get to know not only the kinds of projects, but the kinds of colleagues that they'd be working with in a self-driven, self-propelled journey, the more competitive your company is going to be when it comes to attracting great sales engineers. So that's what I'd be thinking about when it comes to how a data center engineering firm can attract great sales engineers. And that brings us to our final question in this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. If you've been getting good value so far from this week's show, make sure to hit the like button and leave a comment, rate us, review us on whatever platform that you're watching on to help spread the word. So final question for this week is going to take us back into the data center technology sector within the data center ecosystem. So the question is, how does a data recovery and disaster recovery provider improve its data center business development? How does a data recovery and disaster recovery provider improve its data center business development? That's a terrific question. And I love how they're specifically saying data center business development, because the reality is technology companies that provide software and hardware and professional services around data recovery and disaster recovery can really sell to a couple different kinds of clients. They can sell to enterprise clients that have their own offices, their own facilities, and they of course need data recovery and disaster recovery. Like whether you're talking about a professional services firm with a couple dozen or a couple hundred or a couple thousand of employees that work in traditional office parks or high-rise office buildings, or whether you're talking about manufacturing companies with factories and offices, or whether you're talking about a chain of hotels or a chain of restaurants, there's facilities that for sure could experience disaster recovery and have data recovery issues. So there's end users. And then of course, what makes it extra complicated is in the hybrid remote world that we now live in, that's accelerated tremendously during the 2020s. A lot of companies have hundreds or thousands of micro branch offices with one person working remotely. So that needs to be considered as well when it comes to data recovery and disaster recovery. But this particular question, they're asking specifically, how do they improve their business development for data centers for data recovery and disaster recovery? Because depending on your company's mix of hardware, software, and services, and the price points and where you're competitive versus not competitive and what's on your future product roadmap, you may decide that enterprises and mid-market and small and medium-sized businesses and home offices just isn't your thing. And maybe you do really, really well focusing on the data recovery and disaster recovery aspect of co-location operators and enterprise data centers. And maybe you specialize even more. Maybe you've figured out along the way that enterprise data centers, there's a lot of complications that come up, but you love working with co-location operators within the data center ecosystem. And not all data center co-location operators, not huge ones, but ones where they're big enough that disaster recovery and data recovery has tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions, or potentially billions on the line, but not so large that they would choose to manage disaster recovery and data recovery internally. And conversely, you also at the low end of the range are making sure that the company is big enough that they can afford your minimum. So what we're really talking about is a combination of your ideal client profile, where your ideal clients are located and how big or small those companies are, and product market fit, PMF, knowing the exact mix of your products and services that people buy at scale, the price points that they purchase those products and services at, the frequency that they buy those, or the duration of the agreements, and all of the core unit economics, the average client lifetime value, the cost of client acquisition, the sales cycle length, the margins, that helps to give you confidence that you're able to scale strong demand. And as your company graduates out of product market fit, you likely have also gotten to go to market fit, where you know exactly what your sales process looks like to onboard the perfect sales hires, get them through ramp time, get them to meet and exceed quota. So you're able to scale your sales way beyond just your initial founding team to dozens, if not hundreds or thousands of salespeople. And in many cases, especially in this category with data recovery and disaster recovery, it's very likely also that you have channel partners that you're working with, like managed service providers, MSPs, VARs, value-added resellers, network integrators, master agents. And that's a different kind of market fit. That's channel partner market fit, where you've onboarded successful channel partners and they've been with you for a critical mass of time, probably at least a year or two, and they've closed deals and they've been thrilled with the sales compensation and service that they've gotten from your company to provide great disaster recovery and data recovery services to their clients that you're selling through as those channel partners being an extension of your marketing, sales, and services capabilities. So yeah, there's product market fit, and there's go-to-market fit, and there's channel partner market fit that helps you to define whether you're on the right track with how you define your ideal client profile, how you build out your target account lists, how you assign those target account lists to different sales teams within your company, and how you segment within those accounts for the individual buyer personas and what each of those individual buyer personas cares most about. So in this example, we're talking specifically about co-location operators that are big enough but not so big. I call this like Goldilocks, defining your company sizes. Like Goldilocks wasn't, the porridge can't be too hot, not too cold. So not too big, but not too small. So for a company in this space, maybe your ideal clients are co-location operators that have anywhere from say 5 to 50 employees up to say 5,000 employees. And that should give you a couple hundred potential clients in a lot of geographic markets. It should give you a couple thousand co-location operators if you're able to market and sell globally. And then within those target accounts, like who are the people that matter most? Like I mentioned a few moments ago, there's internal stakeholders, like in really small companies, you may be dealing all the way with the C-level executive or like a VP of IT. In the mid-market companies, you're probably dealing with someone more at the executive level who sets the standards. Maybe it's someone in operations. Maybe they're big enough that they actually have someone who has like business continuity or data recovery or disaster recovery or something like that in a particular job title. At 5,000 employees, yeah, you could see that come up from time to time. It's far more likely to happen and even larger. But the challenge is, at what point does a client get to be so large that it's likely that what you're going to do on an outsourced basis, they'd prefer to do internally, or their internal capabilities run circles around your, or they just have such ridiculously complicated financial requirements, insurance requirements, legal requirements, integration requirements that your company is just not able to deal with that today. So know geographically where they're located, which is going to largely be a function of where you have coverage with your own employees and where you have coverage with your channel partners. Know how big or small they should be. And when it comes to data recovery, disaster recovery as well, is with regulated industries, there's going to be certain clients that have requirements that either you can meet or you can't meet. And if you've invested in the certifications and the credentialing and the accreditations to be able to check those boxes, yeah, for sure, that should be in your business development strategy and your sales and marketing playbook, your go-to-marketing playbook. But if you know that there's regulated industries where you can't meet those requirements, those should also be in your business development strategy as an exclusion, so you don't waste a lot of time and resources generating leads and prospecting and taking people through your sales process that where you're going to get knocked out during the sales process because you don't have that credentialing that kind of industry is going to require from a company that's involved in data recovery and disaster recovery. So with all of that in mind, that's the first way that I'd be thinking about improving, is getting really tight about defining that ideal client profile, how you're segmenting within there. And then the second part is, once you've segmented into the end users and into the channel partner play, and anyone else that you think is super important, is get really, really clear on client centricity. What's going on in their world? What is each of the segment for each of those prioritized buyer personas? What are their 5 or 6 big goals, their 5 or 6 big challenges? And then use that as the basis for building phenomenal educational resources that they can do on their own. Interactive tools and quizzes and things like that on your website, downloadable gated premium content like ebooks, special reports, planning guides. And what I'm especially partial to are educational events that you plan and you host with your own internal subject matter experts and perhaps with some of your contractors and channel partners. Events where you get to decide not only what the topic is, but exactly who gets invited, exactly how much time you're going to allocate to that. And you have 100% of attendees' undivided attention. This is so different than going to a conference where you're one of 3,000 attendees or one of 100 different vendors. And if you have a vendor situation going on, maybe there's 20 hours during that conference where the expo floor is open, but the reality is only 6 of those hours get a lot of people coming through that. And when those people are coming through it, a lot of times the reason that they're there is appetizers and drinks. And if you're lucky, with the perfect person actually manages to drop by, but the reality is maybe only 25% of the people at that conference even drop by. And the problem is, of those 25%, when you look at the demographics of those event attendees and you compare that to your ideal client profile, you may have a big loss factor on the percentage of people that are attending that conference that actually match up with your ideal client profile. People talk about loss factors in real estate all the time. They sometimes talk about it in manufacturing, but what a loss factor basically means is, you know, your ideal client profile, put that on the right-hand side of your screen, and on the left-hand side of the screen, get that conference's media kit, get their prospectus for who attended last year and who they think is going to attend this year. A shocking amount of people are committing massive amounts of malpractice and negligence when it comes to doing the most basic of basic due diligence on conference selection, meaning that you look at their attendees and you realize that 70 or 80% of their attendees are not remotely qualified to be a prospect, to be a potential client for our company, or maybe 90% are not. It's super important to know if you're in a situation where there's significant overlap in that conference and you have a green light, or it's an orange light or a red light. And I think a lot of people are making huge financial investment decisions where they're implicitly trusting that conference to solve go-to-market problems, when in reality, for the huge amount that they're spending with bringing multiple team members to that conference or buying a booth and everything that goes into a booth, they literally could fund one or more full-time employees that go really, really deep on their prioritized buyer personas, with hosting a monthly in-person event, hosting a monthly digital event, or all of the above, in a way that much more profoundly impacts your ability to educate and build trust with the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all in the right context. So they see you and your client-facing team members as some of the smartest people on the planet when it comes to anything and everything about how that particular buyer persona deals with data recovery and disaster recovery. And it's very, very hard to do that outside of an owned event context. When it's your own event, however, it becomes a lot more straightforward. You pick the topic, you pick the timing, you pick who gets invited, and you decide what you're going to talk about to deliver a lot of value in a way that cues you up in a way that actually helps your company, as opposed to just feeling like you're keeping up with the Joneses. So those are some of the key considerations that I'd be thinking about for disaster recovery and a data recovery kind of firm that wants to improve its data center business development. Now, if the co-location operators are located nearby your office, you of course can run these events in your own classroom, in your own conference room. If you're selling to a national or global addressable, you could do a roadshow. But I would, in addition, for this particular category, I'm especially partial to running the events as webinars virtually, because you can reach a much wider part of your addressable market, your ideal client profile. If you have geographic proximity, for sure, do both. But yeah, I think it's super important for this particular category to make sure that you have good coverage across your core 2 or 3 buyer personas, especially the end users, especially the colo operators, especially the channel partners, so you can get super relevant and provide a ton of educational value. Again, each of those personas needs to see that your client-facing team members are some of the smartest people on the planet when it comes to anything and everything having to do with disaster recovery and data recovery for their particular segment, for that particular stakeholder and that particular geographic region, and a company of roughly that size in that particular industry. And the more hyper specific it is to who they are and what they care about, the more you're going to literally grab them by the virtual short collar as they scroll by and say, wow, this is so specific and so relevant. How did they know we're going through this right now? Well, they did their buyer persona research. They got really client-centric of addressing your needs in your own words in a way that adds value to your learning and development and professional development process. So you get out of the vendor box and you stay out of the vendor box, because they keep coming back month after month to learn from you. They keep bringing more and more of their peers. You get to meet multiple stakeholders from the decision committee, and you're proactively driving alignment with multiple stakeholders from that company and indoctrinating them with your best practices in their formative stages, where you can really, really shape the criteria that they use to evaluate all of the different data recovery and disaster recovery options that are in front of them. So that's what I'd be thinking about at a high level for how a data recovery and disaster recovery provider can improve its data center business development. So that is the final question that we'll be addressing in this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. I'm so glad that you were able to join us for this week. If you have an idea for a topic, a challenge, a question that you'd like to see us address in an upcoming episode, be sure to leave that in the comments on whatever platform that you're watching on, and we'll add that to the consideration queue for upcoming episodes. If you want to get notified about new educational events and resources just like this, be sure to subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter that comes to your email inbox on Sundays. You can subscribe for free directly on our website at www.dcsmi.com. I'm Joshua Feinberg, Feinberg, from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. If you and I are not currently connected on LinkedIn and you'd like to be, make sure that when you send me the connection request that you reference in the note that you watch and that you're a big fan of Data Center Sales and Marketing Go-to-Market Q, the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A. I'd be happy to be connected with you on LinkedIn. Really glad that you're able to join us for this week to learn all about some of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about from all over the data center ecosystem. And we wish you great success in growing your impact, your team's impact, and your company's impact throughout data centers, critical facilities, and digital infrastructure. Look forward to seeing you back next week. Take care now.
Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com.